Hi, this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And on today's show, we have a special guest who is going to be at this upcoming Chiller Theater uh, extravaganza, for lack of
Yeah,
a better term, April 25th through 27th of this year. He's a special guest of my friend Charles F. Rosenay, who will also be there with selling his books and everything like that. And he has asked me to interview Walter here just to kind of let people know that he's going to be there and what he has to say about his career and everything else. So, for the
uh,
next half hour to hour, depending on how long we go, we'll talk about anything and everything. So, hello,
I'm,
Walter. How are you?
I'm great, Mark. Nice to talk to you. Nice to see you there.
Good
And
to meet
nice
you.
to have pierced through the technology to connect ourselves to one another
Yes.
here.
Now, you are going up there. You're from Nashville nowadays, correct? Is that what you said?
That's correct. I live in Franklin, Tennessee, which is
Okay.
kind of a suburb of Nashville. I've been down here about 27 years now,
Hmm.
and it's a nice place, although it's a lot of people moving here, so it's changed a lot since it was the sleepy town that I moved to.
Mm,
I grew up in New York in Queens
okay.
and, lived in LA and, I'm a city guy.
Right.
And so moving basically to the country, which is what it seemed like,
Hmm.
it was a big move. That was way back in 97.
Hmm.
And, I found that I really do like it. I like the small townness of it and, the proximity to Nashville.
Hmm.
It's nice. And Nashville is, certainly a good music town.
Yeah.
And now
And
it's blown sky high. But
about
I
the
think
uh,
no,
uh,
it's probably that soap opera, that primetime soap opera
oh,
that they did about it. I think that was the demarcation from the sleepy days to the "Hey,
hmm.
well, let's build another big building" days.
Okay. But well, about the time you said you moved there 1997,
Yeah.
that's about the time I visited there because I did a trip across country around that time, and
Okay.
Nashville was one of the spots I went to, and went to the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Sun Records and a few other things that they had there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, of course, Sun is in Memphis. Not to correct you, but
Oh, okay.
that's
Maybe
okay.
I also went to Memphis too, so
Yeah.
maybe a blurry. But Country
Yeah.
Music Hall of Fame is there, and the Grand Ole
Yeah.
Opry.
Country Music
Yeah.
Hall. In those days, it was a kind of in the Quonset hut, wasn't it? It was in that
Which one?
strange building, the Hall of Fame, because they built.
It was an actual physical building at that
Yeah.
point. So this is
Yeah.
97, 98, somewhere around there. So,
Yeah. Because
yeah.
they had a
And I
big.
and I think they had just moved into that property, so you're right. It was, kind of a smaller thing until I
Yeah.
came around.
Yeah, well, and that's when the Titans moved here also, and
Hmm.
that was when Nashville was trying to, be big time,
Yeah.
and now the traffic is big time, basically.
Now, did your musical career lend you there, or you just had a fondness of Nashville and things in this area, in that area?
Well, yeah, I never was big. I mean, I like the old country. I liked, Merle Haggard and George Jones and
Right.
those kind of classic country singers, and then of course my first big break was with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris. And Graham Parsons was the guy who hijacked the Byrds and made
Right.
the uh,
Like in the
psychedelic band into
Burrito
a
Brothers and all
country
that.
band, and then the Flying Burrito Brothers came
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
And so in those days, in 1968, it seemed like the most radical thing that anybody could do because the rednecks were on this side and the hippies were on the other side.
Right.
And, the Beatles would do kind of tongue-in-cheek country songs every now and then, but it wasn't something that was mainstream for those of us who were on the other side there.
Yeah.
So I had to really listen to "Sweetheart of the Rodeo," which came out '68,
Hmm.
and that was really the Byrds doing straight ahead country music. And
Hmm.
then the Burrito Brothers took it a step further, and they did the traditional sounding music, but they added the kind of hip lyrics, the
Right.
psychedelicized lyrics that Graham and Chris Hillman added to that. And so that that got to me. And then so we were doing kind of country rock in my band. In those days, we were still in Georgetown,
Hmm.
and it
Now, which
was
band was this? You had a couple early bands.
yeah,
I guess if you want to
band
talk
called
about them.
band called Sageworth,
Okay.
and Sageworth was the college version of the Malibus.
Okay.
Malibus was the surf band from New York City
Hmm.
that basically I sat in front of my friend John Zambetti in school, and he was doodling a picture of a guitar and an amp, and I was going, "Hey, that's pretty cool." He said, "Well, if you get an electric guitar, you can be in the new band I'm making," and that was the Malibus. And so I did get an electric guitar. I got a Strat, and it. I sort of wish I still had that one now. That would have been one of the antiques road shows. It's
Right,
like, oh,
right.
1964 Stratocaster. So yeah, and so the Malibus transformed into Sageworth and drums, and Sageworth was my college band, and we got real close to getting a deal through the early 70s, and then when it didn't happen,
Mhm.
you know backbiting set in, and it was, oh, it's your fault, no, it's your fault, and
Okay.
so we had gotten an offer from a guy named Chris Darrow, who he was in the original Kaleidoscope, and he was in Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
Oh, okay.
And we met him when Linda Ronstadt was playing at the Cellar Door at Georgetown.
Hmm.
And they, in those days, they would book you for a week there, so or basically 5 or 6 nights. And Linda Ronstadt in 1970 was just on the verge of really being, she had different drum,
Right.
and long, long time was coming up. And so she came in with her band, and they liked our band, and they invited us to come join them. And we sat down and hung out with them, for the rest of that week. Chris Darrow was the tour manager, also playing fiddle and mandolin with Linda in that tour. And he liked the band. He wanted to produce it. Offered us a deal to come to L.A. Half the band thought it would be a good idea, but the other half, we had about 6 or 7 people in the band in those days, and so we had a couple of lead singers and a couple of guitar players, bass and drums and keyboards. And so we were a really good band, and we got to kind of the top of the Washington D.C. scene,
Hmm.
and thought, well, where are we going to go? And a couple of us had grown up in New York. We thought, I don't want to go to New York. It's too crazy. LA seemed very enticing to me,
Hmm.
but they wanted all our publishing. And as the songwriter of most of the songs, I didn't like that idea. So, but I stayed in touch with Chris. The band moved to Boston. We played in Boston for a couple of years. And that's where the demise came of Sageworth. But concurrent with that, we had made friends with Emmylou Harris, who was playing the circuit in
Hmm.
Georgetown, the same one that we were. And I was there the night that Chris Hillman came to her with the offer of, hey, my friend's looking for a singing partner. And that was Graham Parsons. And I had already, you know, caught the bug about Graham Parsons. It's like, who is this guy? And
Right.
he seems very charismatic and all of that. And so I went, and well, Emmy came back to the house, and I played Sweetheart of the Rodeo and Gilded Palace of Sin for her. And
Hmm.
when Graham came the next day, they needed a place where they could try out their voices with one another. And so I offered the kitchen in what we called Sageworth House, which was kind of the last of the low rent in Georgetown as as it was becoming more and more gentrified in the early
Right.
70s. And
Typical.
and so yeah, and so I was there when Graham and Emmy sang together really for the first time.
Wow.
And I was amazed, and I was, Graham, I love the way you sound. Who should I listen to in country music if I want to get into it? And
Hmm.
then he advised me who to listen to, which were the people basically I just told you about,
Right.
Merle Haggard and George Jones and
Yeah.
Charlie Pride. He also added.
Hmm.
And then when they got started working together, Emmy liked the song that I had written called Hearts on Fire. And my bass player, Tom Geiderer, said, yeah, it's a good song, but let's change a few of the lyrics. Because I was still doing the tongue-in-cheek kind of approach to country music where, I got heartburn, hearts on fire. Let's have,
Yeah,
some and he was like, you could be serious about this and it might be a good song. So yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Then Emmy took it to Graham and Graham liked it and they recorded it for the Grievous Angel album,
Hmm.
which was kind of my calling card. That came out in 73,
Hmm.
concurrent with Graham's demise, as it were.
Hmm.
And so that was what I had when I moved. When the band broke up, I called Chris Darrow and I said, "Hey, the band broke up, but I want to come to California." He said, "Come on, you can play for me."
Mm.
So I moved to thinking I was moved to LA, but I moved to Claremont,
Oh
which
yeah.
is about 40 miles east,
Hmm.
and a lovely little town, a college town.
Hmm.
And almost at the same time as I moved there, tour behind his new album, which had it came out on United Artists in England, and I think he might have came. I think it came out in America too, but he was doing a tour of the British Isles, opening for a group called the Man Band, which were kind of like the Welsh Grateful Dead.
Mm.
And Deke Leonard was the lead singer and lead guitar player. He was great. Anyway, so he said, so UA pulled their tour support. Chris turned to me. He said, "Well, do you want to be my band for a month?" And of course, this was the culmination of my struggle. I'm going to California. I'm getting there. I'm here. I'm in
Right, right.
California. What? You want to go to You want to go to England? But of course, I said yes. And during that tour of the month of May in 1974, I met the man who would ultimately offer me my first deal a couple of years later, and that was a guy named Andrew Lauder,
Mm.
who was an A&R guy with UA. So
Mm.
yeah, so it all sort of tied in that way. But yeah, the country part of it came from that. But once I got there, I was ready to do more rock and roll,
Mm.
and uh, and so, but country rock was a big part of my bag in those days, as they said.
Yeah.
So yeah, it and so I settled in Claremont more or less, struggling for a while, giving guitar lessons,
Mm.
helping out David Lindley, who you may know as the guitar player who worked with Jackson Brown, and he
Oh
did a
yeah.
number
Yeah.
of albums on his own.
Hmm.
David was Chris's brother-in-law,
Hmm.
and in those days he was playing with Jackson, and I had met Jackson when Sageworth played at the Bitter End in '72.
Hmm.
The owner of the Bitter End wanted to manage us. And so he stuck us in for like a 15-minute set, the beginning of the night for a week. With Jackson was technically the opening act, but we were after he did that with his first album. And then the headliner was Sandy Denny and Richard Thompson
Mm.
from Fairport Convention,
Right.
who I love both of them.
Hmm.
Amazing. They're great. And so it was a great week for us. And we had gotten to know Jackson a little bit then.
Hmm.
So I got to hang out with these people who I kind of was aspiring to be around,
Hmm.
the country rock people of LA.
Now, during this time, what were you trying to be, if anything? I mean, you probably were going any direction your career would go, but were you trying to be a
Yeah,
writer or a player or both or
kind
what?
of all purpose. I was
Okay.
that was the
Okay.
thing when the band broke up. I came back home to have dinner with my parents, and I sat down with my mother, and I said, "Well, she said, well, now that the band broke up, what are you going to do to get serious?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to move to LA and make a record."
Right.
And she said, "Oh, okay." But that was the weird part about it because I had never really been the lead singer in the bands.
Hmm.
I was the writer and the guitar player and, kind of the leader of the band, but not the lead singer. Annie McClune was the lead singer of Sageworth, and she made an album on her own and did records with me later on. So, yeah, I always felt like everybody else could sing better than me. So, yeah, so I was just doing whatever I could do. Like with Chris, it was like, okay, well, Chris offered to make a band with some people from Claremont, a guy named Earl Shackelford and David Millard, both excellent writers in their own right. And so it would have been the band. Well, the band was called the Ghost Writers, W or R. We went back and forth about that. And then we started to rehearse, and we're moving toward doing like a hoot night at the Troubadour, which ultimately we did. Um, And at that point, that guy Andrew Lauder, who I had met with Chris, happened to be in the audience, and he saw the band play. And even though I was only singing one of the songs, I had written like 6 of the 7 songs that we did in that set that
Mm,
night. And so the the outcome was he offered me the deal instead of the band. And of course, I was sleeping on the couch of David and Earl out in Claremont at this point, and so it was a little awkward at first for me with that. But they understood that that's what I was trying to do, and they were too, but not with the same drive of the momentum of moving from the East Coast to LA to do it,
right,
rather
right.
than just going into LA from Claremont. So yeah, and so once we had that, he offered a deal where I would make 3 singles for United Artists in
Mm,
England. So that would be 6 songs, A and B sides.
mhm,
And with that in hand, we went searching for producers. And by this time, Chris's manager, Greg Lewick, had become my manager
mm,
within this process. And so, yeah, I owe my whole career to Chris Darrow and his,
mhm,
welcoming ways and his kind of connections when I moved out there. But yeah, so we had been doing demos at this weird little funky studio in the valley called Sound City,
mhm.
which has now become somewhat famous for the
Right.
records that we made there, of course, and Dave Grohl and that documentary. So I was aiming high. I was thinking, Todd Rundgren would be a great producer. How about Brian Wilson? Is he
Mhm.
sane these days, or is he?
Right.
It was one of those eras where we weren't sure about that. This was '76,
Mhm,
and so the engineer who had helped us with our demos out there said, "Well, how about Buckingham Nicks?"
mm,
And I was like, "And who is that?" I didn't know who Buckingham
mhm,
Nicks was. I thought it was some guy named
right.
Buckingham Nicks.
Yeah.
But no, you have you heard Fleetwood Mac? Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. They were a blues band, right? They're a psychedelic blues band. Well, no, not so much
Not
anymore.
now. Yeah, but yeah,
You
or not
have
mid
to listen
70s,
to
but
this
yeah.
new record, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then they gave me the Buckingham Nicks album to listen to, which I was bowled over by. Of course,
Mhm,
it was a little more overly produced than I kind of envisioned. I thought of myself as a real rocker,
mhm.
straight from the Beatles, 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and let's make a rock and roll record.
Right.
And the Eagles too, and you know, they, anyway. Yeah, because I had met Glenn and Don through Linda Ronstadt. Because after that
Yeah.
first time she
Mhm,
came through, every time they would come to town, we would hang out with them, and she always had different members
yeah.
coming along with her, and that was pretty amazing
Mhm,
just to meet those people as they were ascending, and it felt like, okay, this is where I want to go, and this is how I want to do it.
mhm,
So yeah, I listened to the records and it was like, yeah, this is good. This sounds like what I'm coming from, because I had always been working with Annie McClune. So I had that male female thing going,
mhm.
even though I wasn't singing so much duets with her, but I was working with her. And as it turned out, Annie's birthday was like a couple of weeks after, or a week after Stevie's. It was like right in there.
Mm.
So whatever that's worth. And of course, Lindsay, my middle name being Lindsay, it was
Mhm.
like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And he liked the Beach Boys and he liked Kingston Trio, as I learned how to play guitar through the Kingston Trios books, and so and records.
Mhm.
Anyway, so it seemed like, okay, this is a good idea. Let's do this. And meanwhile, their rocket to success is taking off, and
Mhm.
Rhiannon is kind of hitting the airways, and they were working on Rumors at that point.
Right.
And so they liked my music. They wanted to work on it, but they had to do it around their schedule. So it sort of truncated little sections of it. But and they produced the first 6 tracks as if we were doing the UA deal.
Mhm.
They sounded so good that Greg, the manager, got in touch with a friend of his, David Krebs, who had been managing Aerosmith in New York, and he had connections with Columbia. And so, boom, they went to Columbia and they offered me a 6 album deal
Mm.
and money to boot. So, it was like, oh my goodness, I've made it. It's
Mhm.
finally happened. Of course, that's just the beginning of any kind of making it.
Yeah.
Is
Now you have to
that's
work.
that's the fallacy. That's like, when you make I'm going to make this record myself, and you put all your money in it, and then you finish it, and it's like, oh, you mean I have to promote it?
Yeah.
Oh, that costs money.
Uh,
Oh, yeah. So yeah, learning a lot about the business as I was going along, but I had always, more and more wanted to be part of it, and then, but I was surprised that Andrew offered me this deal, and I had to say, well, do you want me to sing the songs too? And he was like, yeah, you sing the song. It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I don't have to work on that. And so, yeah, and so having people I respected, Stevie and Lindsay,
mhm.
as my kind of compatriots on making this record, they were like in my band and in the studio with me in the control room, and
Mhm.
and they gave me a lot of confidence to do what I had to do. And so, yeah, and that became Fundamental Role, my first album, which
Mhm.
came out in '77. And, and it was difficult during those times because Stevie and Lindsay were going through their famous I Hate You period. Where,
I could say
uh,
now, what's new? It's like
yeah,
2025, the same
that's,
thing, you
yeah, exactly.
know?
It's funny that they've become this almost stereotype of that. But yeah, they were going through that, and they wanted to keep the Buckingham Nicks brand outside of Fleetwood Mac, even though they'd been in Fleetwood Mac for about a year, a little over a year at that
Right.
point. So, and yeah, and it was great. I mean, Lindsay felt like some long lost brother that I had never met. That
Mhm.
we got along really well, and of course, it's famously put out there how Stevie inspired me as I look at her face over your shoulder here on the
Oh,
promo there.
over there. Yeah, over there. I'm pointing the wrong
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
There.
that was a wonderful moment there. That was
Yeah.
the,
Zoom is always backwards. If I point over
oh,
there,
yeah,
I really need to be pointing over there.
yeah, it was like
Yeah.
but
Anyway.
yeah, no, that was the debut party for my first album,
Oh, okay.
and it was, it was certainly a high watermark for me
Hmm.
in many ways. And but that tension was there. Well, the production team was me, the engineer who had suggested Buckingham Nicks, and
Hmm.
Buckingham Nicks, so the four-headed production team, and it worked out that Lindsay was better with us. Each of them worked better alone than together. And so
Hmm.
Lindsay would help with the arrangements and the recording of the tracks.
Hmm.
Stevie would come in more for the vocals,
Hmm.
and then Lindsay would come back in, and Stevie, of course, too, but for the mix. And that was where
Right.
Lindsay really shined as far as that went.
Hmm.
And then, but for the second album, Not Shy album, it was, yeah.
Oh, see,
One
now I
where,
know where to point.
yeah, well, during the recording of Fundamental Role, I
Yeah.
had a song called Tunnel of Love, which
Hmm.
is, my most salacious song, as I like to say. That, and Stevie did this wailing background vocal in the
Hmm.
middle of the night out at Sound City, and I drove her home that night, and I was very inspired by it all,
Hmm.
and wound up thinking of her and writing the lyrics to Magnet and Steel.
Mm.
I had already had the musical idea going. I wanted to do that 50s beat thing,
Hmm.
but yeah, and well, it's a funny thing when you're trying to make it. Well, certainly in those days, I guess things are different these days, but you keep thinking, oh, this is going to be our breakthrough. This gig is going to do it, and this guy
Hmm.
is going to, and it's always disappointing. But then suddenly, when things start to happen, and the
Hmm.
doors start opening, and it's like, oh, I loved you from the beginning, man. Come on in,
Right.
yeah, all of that. It's an interesting study in the dynamics of the music business. I suppose
Yeah.
any business, but certainly from
Yeah.
music business for me.
A
And I
question.
I have just put a little plug in here. I
Sure.
have finished my autobiography, my life story. I'm
Okay.
calling it Magnitude: My Secrets to Reveal. Magnet with the
Great. I got it.
misspelling of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I tell more in-depth stories than you're getting here tonight. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
I,
know,
I I knew you
gratitude.
were working on it, but if it's finished, that's more updated news than I have because I have that he's working on it. Yeah,
Well,
so,
the thing with
yeah.
you never really finish a book like that. You just kind of abandon it.
Right.
It's like, it's because it's like, well, and then this
Yeah.
happened. I became a grandfather in the last 3 years. So
Mm.
that had to be part of it because
Right.
it was up to date and all of the things that are going on. The whole
Yeah.
yacht rock phenomenon.
Right.
And, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm really happy that I'm in, included in the yacht rock oeuvre.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm probably the barnacle on the yacht of rock, because my
Well,
other songs are not the schmaltzy kind of stuff.
right.
A lot of it
Well,
is.
it's funny. Just to familiarize myself. I mean, I knew Magnet and Steel when it first came out, but I said this guy has much to have more songs because he put out more than one album and stuff like that. So let me familiarize myself. And then, one song that I go, oh, I know this one. It's almost as popular to me is Magnet and Steel is Hot Summer Nights. I used to hear that on the radio all the time. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but my thing was when I played Magnet and Steel, I just turned to my wife who loves what's dubbed yacht rock, and I said, "Do you think this is classifies as yacht rock?" And she goes, "Oh yeah," and I go, "Okay," because I wasn't sure if it kind of fell into that class. I know
yeah.
like Christopher Cross is into that and stuff like that. Well, not intentionally for him either. I mean, that's a term that came more recently.
Well, yeah, and
You know,
and
that's
luckily, I got to be involved with the people who really started that. There was a
yeah.
band out of Atlanta called the Yacht Rock Review.
Oh, okay.
And, like maybe 12 or 13 years ago, they got in touch with me. And, it was kind of a joke at first.
Hmm.
There's a series of these little vignettes by Hollywood Steve on
Hmm.
YouTube,
Hmm.
which is kind of really cheesy, kind of Saturday Night Live, send ups of how did yacht rock begin?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's because it's in the marina and it's Coco the marina. Anyway, it's
Right.
really funny stuff. But they were a cover band doing a lot of this material, and they thought,
Ah,
"Hey, well, let's do it for real." And they would dress in the polyesters, and they're a really good band.
yeah.
And Robbie Dupree and me and Peter Beckett and Elliot Lurie, who is Brandy, You're a Fine Girl,
Hmm.
um, got to play with them, and we went even did a tour with them at one point
Right.
up and down the East Coast. So yeah, I mean, I was happy to be in that and to see the kind of enthusiasm that this generated in new people and younger people. They put the captain's hat on and they would do
Right.
the whole thing, and it, you know, I don't know. I've heard bad things about the documentary. I haven't seen the
I haven't
documentary
seen
where
it either, so
all
I
the
probably have
big
to look.
guys sort of
Yeah.
go, "Oh, yacht rock,"
Yeah.
they kind of put it down. With any good thing, there's good things that come, and then they get
Hmm.
overexploited, and then you know,
Right. Now, at the time those were big hits, I just thought of it as just general top 40 rock, which is, you
well,
know, yeah.
yeah, yeah, basically the classic
Now,
rock, as it
now
were.
I remember when all these albums came out and right behind me here, and stuff like that. And, like I said, you were played with everyone else, and um what was going through your mind at that time? Because I mean, you know, some people would argue, and take no offense, I'm sure you've known this, it's like you're considered a one-hit wonder, but
Oh
it's like
yeah,
you did so much more, at least during that time frame, especially. Did you know that Magnet and Steel was going to be the hit it was? Did you try to top it, or, how did all this whole era and that song kind of come about?
yeah. I was curious because yes, as I said, it is kind of a throwback to the 50s. The
Right.
Stroll was that beat,
Hmm.
and there was a group called the Diamonds who had a song called The Stroll. And
hmm
of course, when I got to do American Bandstand, I, traded barbs about that with Dick because that's where I got that, basically the stroll from him.
hmm
And so when I brought it in, it certainly was different. Yes, it
hmm
had, it had this throwback thing to it as a pair, and the other stuff is pretty straight ahead,
Right.
borderline country rock kind of stuff, I think. So it was as we finished it that the Columbia executives, as they would listen to the tracks, would think, "Oh, yeah, this one stands out," and so great, if that's what you want to go with, that's what we'll go with. And
Hmm.
but then it wasn't until it had the success that, oh, well, maybe I can write another one like this. So I mean, if you look at other albums, there are, strolls hidden within most every one
Right.
that I've done. It's like, well, you like that one.
Yeah.
How about this one?
Yeah.
And it's so hard to analyze. Of course, Stevie's voice and the power of her being part of it, and the double power of her being the inspiration for it,
Right.
I think has a lot to do with the integrity of that song. But the toy piano that Lindsay brought in that
hmm
is on the chorus is
Yeah.
subtly there. And at the time, I mean, and it's I've heard other songs with that since
Yeah.
then.
The only
And
one I
so
can think of is Summer Breeze,
well,
has
yeah,
a
yeah,
toy
yeah,
piano.
yeah, right. It's not undone, but Lindsay had that kind of imagination and ear for production that I admired, and that was one of the things we shared because growing up, being a Beach Boy fan, if you listen closely to Beach Boy albums, certainly during this period from Summer Days and Summer Nights, Beach Boys Today,
Mhm,
and then Pet Sounds,
mhm,
there's a lot to sink your teeth into as far as, well, what's that arrangement? How do you do that? Or how did the different instruments that he uses and
mhm,
then the different chord structures. So yeah, it was Lindsay's expertise, I think, that gave it that sheen, that shine,
mhm,
that makes it kind of sparkle on the radio,
mhm.
and that was good. And yet, it was during a time when new wave and punk was taking over from
Right.
which had been was going on when I
Yeah.
started, and then we were drawn to that. I was drawn to, well, we were on the road for 7 months in '78, the
Mhm,
band and I. And so when we got to do the third album, it was like, well, let's do it ourselves. Let's go in. Stevie was moving out of a house in the Hollywood Hills, which had formerly been the love nest of silent film star Rod LaRock and Velma Banky.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it had some history to it. And it was, of course, a lovely place to be. And we had, well, Tom Moncrief was my guitar player in those days. He was living in the basement of Stevie's house. And
Mhm,
so when it came time to do demos, it was like, well, let's just get a recorder and do it here in the house. There was room for that. And so we did that, and everybody liked the sound of it after we finished it. And so when Stevie moved out, we rented that house for 3 months and made it our studio. And we just had this amazing, wonderful house where there was very limited parking up in the Hollywood Hills. And so it was hard for people to just drop in, which was good.
mhm,
We liked the isolation of it, and so it it was idyllic in a lot of ways making that album. So it was very unshiny, that next album. It was very much the raw kind of, this is what we sound like on stage. Let's
mhm.
make it sound that way and make it to the band. So yeah, that was and but of course now we get to the crux of, well, why aren't you as big as, well, I did a tour with Tom Petty in September of
Mhm.
'78 where he would open for me one night and I would open for him the next night. He had
Wow.
the FM credibility, I had the AM credibility because
Mhm,
of that. And the thing is, I mean, who knows, of course, But speculation, I had Stevie and Lindsay on my first two albums. The guy who signed me to Columbia, when we talked about doing the next album, the hi-fi album,
Hmm.
he said, "Well, that's a good idea. Step away from them and establish yourself as yourself." And so we went with that. And by the time we finished the album, he had moved to RCA, and the
Mm.
guy who took over for him listened to the album and said, "Well, I don't hear Stevie Nicks on here. Where is
Oh,
she?"
brother.
It's like, well, wait a minute. She didn't sign. I signed to you, and blah blah blah. And
Mm.
so they kind of undercut the promotion of, the people that I had met in '78 when I was riding high in top 10. The next time around in '79, they were going, Columbia is not really promoting your
Yeah.
record and all. It's like, what's going
Wow.
on with that? It's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that being the third album of the six album deal,
Hmm.
um, so it made for a shorter touring year that year in '79.
Mm.
And but then we had to go back and negotiate, because I produced the hi-fi album basically with Tom,
Hmm.
and so we had to agree on a producer with Columbia, and we got a guy named Earl Mankey, and Earl Mankey had worked with the Beach Boys and also produced a band called 2020.
Mm.
We had that new wave thing, and he had the Beach Boy thing, so he seemed like an ideal candidate. And he
Mm.
was a nice guy. He was all right. He had some weird methods that were different for me after knowing what I knew from the first two albums, working with Stevie and Lindsay, kind of intimately with the mix and with all the sounds. It was like
Hmm.
Earl very very much would put on his headphones, and it's like, Earl, what about that? And he would be doing his thing. So live and learn. So that was the fourth album, which also was basically stillborn.
Mm.
And at that point, since we weren't getting promoted, it was like, why are we doing this? Why am I wasting half of a year or more making this record? And then in a month, because Columbia, with so many acts to juggle,
Hmm.
to get their attention and to get their promotional point of the spear, so to speak, it is a tricky thing, and
Yeah.
so with shifting people, and then in those days, there people were walking around with a target on their back because of the economy, and that was the
Yeah.
years when gas lines were happening at gas
Right.
stations, and so they wanted the hits, and they didn't want to have the developmental kind of albums that had been going on for years.
Yeah.
I mean, I had this meeting when Greg and I went. It was at the Columbia Convention in fall of '78, where my record was the top Columbia record at the moment. And we met
Hmm.
with Walter Yetnikoff, who was the president of the CBS group, and tried to encourage him to promote the album more and to
Hmm.
get Hot Summer Nights released, because it still hadn't been released, even though
Hmm.
Magnet came out in March and
Hmm.
peaked, yeah, in September. But the stations that were on it early were on Hot Summer Nights during the summer,
Hmm.
oddly enough. It seemed like a nice time for a song like that. But
Hmm.
they wouldn't release it until October, November.
Mm.
And it, sort of petered out midway up the chart. The following year, a cover of it by the group called Night got to be a hit around the world, and
Hmm.
then it it made it the most covered song that I had ever written, which is amazing to me because it's basically a song. Well, there's a funny story about Hot Summer Nights, if we have a minute to talk
Sure.
about that. So
Hmm.
on the road in '77, the Fundamental Role tour, Stevie had played this song for me and said, Fleetwood Mac doesn't want to do this song. What do you think of it? And I said, yeah, I like it. I'll do it. And so I had learned it with my band, and we did it as kind of a add-on to our sets when we get an encore or something. And we went in to do the basic tracks for Not Shy. And remember, Stevie isn't around for these anymore. It's Lindsay there now. And we're working out, and it's a song called Sisters of the Moon, or Sister of the Moon, as I called it. And Lindsay, of course, recognized it, and he came out and he was like, what's this about? Like, well, you guys weren't going to do it. I thought we've been playing it, and blah blah blah. He's like, yeah, why don't you just go home and write another song? This was going to be the big closing song, side two of my album, my new album. And in those days, that was the big climax of your recording. And I went home. It was the middle of the summer, and I started thinking about when I was in high school and when summertime came around, we got more time to play in the band, and we would play music all the time. And so I basically wrote a song about the camaraderie of having a band and being together with guys and working together and that whole thing. And that's what Hot Summer Nights is about.
Hmm.
And uh, and so I was amazed that it became successful, and it was the most covered song that I had done. It was Swedish and German and Japanese and French in their language, and so it's pretty interesting, things like that happen. And then of course, flash to 2009, Eminem winds up using it for his
Right.
comeback single, "We Made You," and I had to approve that. They had to play it for me over the phone, and I had to approve that song before they could release it.
Wow.
These were days of big litigation of
Right.
people sampling songs and stealing songs, and so they had, I thought that was really great that they were upfront about it and just,
Hmm.
that this is.
Did you get
And
anything from it? I
oh
mean,
yeah, oh yeah,
okay,
it
good.
was a nice boost. But I had
Nothing.
expected it to be either the riff that did,
Hmm.
or the hook, which I think is like the ooh part in the chorus.
Hmm.
It wasn't either of those. It was just kind of the chord structure, and it was the Night version of the song, not mine, because Night did it in G minor. I did it in D minor.
Oh.
So it was at first I went, oh man, they've got somebody else's song and they think it's mine. And so I kept listening. It was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Okay. And yeah, so I had to negotiate. Basically, there are 5 writers listed on that song, "We Made You," which sounds like a Nashville kind of thing because
Right.
you walk past the room where someone's writing a song down here, and hey, give me credit on that. Yeah, and that was a top 10 song for him.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it definitely was a boost for a lot of my career at that point and for my catalog, sure.
Hmm.
And then he won a VMA. Even the video of that is pretty funny, where he has all these celebrity impersonators. It's like Jessica Simpson sing the chorus. That's how it starts, and thing about Lindsay Lohan and Tony Romo and all the stuff in there.
Right.
And so yeah, it's a really amusing video, and he won an award for it. And
Hmm.
so I'm watching that going. He gets up there and gets this award and goes, "I got a lot of people to thank for this." And I go, "Okay, here we go. He's going to say my name. Here it comes." No, no,
Oh
no.
well. Oh
My,
well.
my interpolation. It's called an interpolation. What they did with my song on that. But anyway, yeah. So you never know where a song's going to go, and yeah, I do have my own page in the One Hit Wonders
Hmm.
book by
Yeah.
Joel Whitburn,
Yeah.
um, and it and yet, you know, I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that. I mean, it's very, very precise. It's like you have to have only one song in the top 10
Right.
that's released.
Yeah.
So, I'm in there with Jimi Hendrix and
Right.
a lot of other really good
Yeah.
people. So, yeah.
Now, career-wise, you kind of remind me of two different people, Dave Edmonds and also Greg Kinn, and they had their share of one hit, as it were. You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
Greg Kinn used to say, I'm a two and a half hit wonder,
Yeah.
because he always said he had two hits and one that kind of made top 40. But,
Yeah. No. Yeah. I
you know,
relate to both those guys.
hmm.
Uh, yeah. Dave Edmonds. Well, with the UA connection in England,
Hmm.
I did get to hang out a little bit with some of those people, and with Nick Lowe
Hmm.
and Andrew Lauder is basically the man behind Elvis Costello as well. So
Right.
see them guys, and yeah, but yeah, I think both of those guys have the same approach as I do, which is
Yeah.
basically guitar rock it goes back to the Beatles probably, or maybe
Right.
even further back a little
Hmm.
bit,
Yeah.
you know. And so, yeah, and for that matter, I get compared with Petty a lot too,
Oh
and
yeah.
you know, we honestly just come from the same place. Of he was just a little bit better at sounding like Roger McGuinn, I think,
Yeah.
or but
Yeah.
no, it it's a genre
Hmm.
that has maybe been absorbed a little bit into Americana these days, or
Yeah.
alt country, but uh, and of course the yacht rock thing has
Right.
me out there. I did some shows opening up for Atlanta Rhythm Section and Firefall not too long ago, and they went really well. It was just music guitar and a little box that gave me some harmonies, if
Hmm.
I step on it,
Hmm.
and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed telling the stories of the songs and sort of giving the breadth of my career because that's the thing. After so after we got out of the deal of the 4 album deal, well, the 6 album deal that turned
It
into a
became
four
formal.
album for Columbia. I I did a record with my high school band, the Malibus,
Hmm.
which sort of cashed in on the notoriety that I had produced with those records, and it was put out on Rhino. It was called Malibu's Rule,
Hmm.
and it was a fun album to do. We even did a version of Hot Summer Nights on there that I
Hmm.
rewrote the lyrics to, apropos to the Malibu specifically.
Hmm.
And then we made a deal with Danny Bramson at Backstreet Records. And Backstreet Records was Tom Petty's label,
Right.
and it was an independent label distributed by MCA when we signed. And so that was really fun. We got in there and got to do, and that album was called Wild Exhibitions, and it I got to produce it with Dwayne Scott, who was the engineer back in the day with the early stuff that we did. And it had a single called Full Moon Fire,
Mm.
which there's a video of and it's a song basically metaphorically. It was during a period where I was doing things between deals that I don't think were the most positive or constructive to me. It was, a metaphorical werewolf at night I would turn
Right.
into. And so the werewolf in my soul, I like to say.
Yes.
And so we did this video, um, and I turned into a werewolf.
Yeah.
But
You had
because,
Lon Chaney clips in there, didn't you?
well, that's it,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was Universal MCA.
Yeah.
We cut costs by not seeing each hair grow on my face rather than the way they do it in the stop action of
Hmm.
that. And so I got a glove that made my hand into a werewolf hand, and then they took a couple of hours and glued it all on my face, and
Wow.
then I turned into the werewolf, and I ran muck in Silver Lake and in Los Feliz, and it was fun. It was a fun video to do. My soon-to-be wife was the my girlfriend in that,
Mm.
and her family and my band. And
Hmm.
if you, I don't know if you've seen the video, but there, we do have like vampires and hunchbacks,
Yeah,
and
I just watched it the other
yeah,
day. Like I said, I just
yeah,
to familiarize myself, I said,
yeah.
well, let me go on YouTube and see what's on there. And so that's why I knew Lon
Oh, I'm
Chaney
glad you
Jr. is
found
on
it.
there and stuff like that. So,
Right, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, that was a fun thing to do. And Danny was, we were cruising along. It was a bigger opening act, or what, not opening act, but a start of a record
Hmm.
than he had had with Petty at that point. And this was '83.
Yeah.
So, yay, great. We got the super bullet and we got this and that. And then we kept trying to get the video to MTV, and it was one of these things where we can play it, but if you want to get it in special notice, or whatever it was called, you'd have to wait a little bit. And so we waited, and during that time, the bullet, I'm not sure if it lost it then, but it went from super bullet to just a regular bullet on the chart.
Hmm.
And then concurrently, the presidency of MCA, the parent label,
Mhm.
was up for grabs.
Mhm.
And Danny, who was my guy at Backstreet, wanted to be the president. And so did Irving Azoff, who everybody knows. And he now owns my favorite restaurant in LA, which is the Apple Pan.
Oh,
And so I have mixed feelings about that now.
okay.
Uh, because because he said because the bitterness, and he didn't want me to succeed because it would have shown Danny as something good, and they were really battling it out for that. And so I got, the lost in the politics of it. The same kind of the same thing with Columbia, where the guy didn't hear Stevie and thought, well, we're not going to promote it because Stevie's not. It's the weird politics of record business.
Now,
But
didn't you record another album around that time? Was it for this label that was released years later as the Lost album? Is that part of this
well,
same?
that's the next
Yeah,
episode
yeah,
in this saga,
yeah.
this sad saga. Um, yeah, and so so Full Moon Fire, petered out in the early, early 40s, a little mid 40s. I don't know, depending on what chart. Never quite cracked the top 40,
Hmm.
but in some places it did really well. But of
Hmm.
course, that's the smaller market know about me more than the bigger markets do. Anyway, yeah, and then during that time, the woman who was in the video with me, we got married,
Hmm.
and then Greg, my manager, was like, "Well, the best way to get a new deal is if we go in with these new songs that you have, and start the album, and then we'll go and sell it to a label or whatever." And so that was the idea. We went to a studio called Mad Dog in Venice, California, and I called in my friends, and my Chris Darrow came in and played. David Lindley, Lindsay played. Christine McVie sang on it with me, and it's a real good album. But it sort of got halfway done, and then the plug got pulled
Wow.
for whatever reason. So I had a cassette of it from the Ford mix that we had done just before the plug got pulled, and I had been carrying that around. And then you flash forward, this was years later. So I had moved to Nashville, and this was 97. And I went to it's a health food store by a guy named Lou Rossi, who was a professional wrestler in the 50s.
Wow.
And he had this health food store and vinyl.
Hmm.
So so I was in there, and he recognized me, and was like, "Oh, man," so I had a picture taken with him. And there's a guy here who's got a label who's trying to put out some of your music. I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And so he connected me with this guy named John Edwards, who had a label called Renaissance Records. It was just around the corner. It was right here in Cool Springs. And so and I went there, and then so John said, "Yeah, I'm trying to do like a bear family. There's a company out of Germany called the Bear Family, Baer,
Hmm.
but they have a bear as their logo, and they do these in-depth reissues of artists' work. I mean, I'm not sure if they're even still in business, but during those years, that's what they did. And so that's what John was trying to do with my catalog. He was trying to get those 4 albums and make them into this, you know, big new Egan thing. And so but he said, but Sony, which is now Columbia was now Sony,
Hmm.
have stalled on me. They won't license it to me. And so I went to Sony, and they said, well, that's because he hasn't paid for the other things he's licensed. So we're not going to license it to him. So I went back there and told him that, and he was like, well, and then soon after that, he I don't know exactly all the details, but he left town with his secretary and left the company in the hands of the general manager. And so the general manager turns to me and he goes, well, do you have anything else you want to put out? And I said, well, I got this cassette of this really good album.
Wow.
And and just coincidentally, there was a guy named Robert Corrich who was there visiting from England, and he had a label called Red Steel Music,
Hmm.
and he specialized in remastering things. And he said, I can make that sound great. I said,
Hmm.
oh, okay, well, let's do that. And so that's how the Lost album came about. It
Hmm.
came from that cassette. Robert remastered it. He put it out in England as the Mad Dog album. It came out here as the Lost album.
Hmm.
And and in fact, Robert is an intermittent guy. He says a lot of great things about how he appreciates what I do and everything, and he puts out things. He doesn't necessarily follow through promoting them all the time, and then he disappears and does. I think he does real estate or something when he's not doing his musical work.
Hmm.
And but he's come back to me recently and said he wants to put out the Lost album, the Mad Dog album, as a vinyl for
Hmm.
Record Store Day this
Cool.
coming November. So, with fingers crossed, I'll tell you that the
Hmm.
Lost album will be out in November
Hmm.
on vinyl, which I
Right.
think would be great. It would be really
Cool.
nice. It's a good album.
Yeah.
It's a really good album.
Hmm.
Jackson Brown is on there with me too.
Hmm.
Um, it's when I first moved to LA, part of it was to play in Jackson's band. We skipped over that part earlier, but there's a lot that.
Well, yeah, you play in a lot of bands. I mean, it even says on here he's played in Spirit for a while, not originally, but
Right, I was in
you
Spirit in
know,
the late '80s, so I did 3 years with them. I was
yeah,
in 2 versions of the Burritos.
yeah,
I was
that's
in
it
yeah,
there.
man, yeah. Yeah, we got the spelling right too. That was great.
I didn't get this. I got this right from the website.
Yeah,
The
no,
so
it's nice. I appreciate, whoever put it together. I think
yeah.
Charles. Um,
Um, but I one thing I noticed is, it's like no matter what, you seem to not be too deterred that every few years you put out a new album. What prompts you to do this? I mean, do you just get another deal, or you just get the urge to write and perform again? What goes on?
yeah, I started writing songs in 1964
Hmm.
when I was inspired by, The Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las. In kind of a negative way. I was like, I could write something like this. And I wrote a silly song called The Teenage Morgue, which very forgettable and just as well. But you have to start somewhere.
Right.
And my friend John Zambetti, who invited me into the Malibus, was also starting to write songs around this time, and we were going to high school together. So I would come in and go, "Hey, I wrote this song last night," and we'd get together after school and play together, and then he would go home and write one and come the next day and show me his song. And so we had this very symbiotic relationship going on as far as songwriting went, and we nurtured ourselves as songwriters. The high school we went to was called Loyola High School in Manhattan, and it's a very small school. I got in it because of playing basketball, basically. Um, and so you get a lot of attention, and there were teachers there who I think inspired me to write one way or another. I would be writing poetry or short stories and
Mm.
things for school. I was the editor of the literary magazine in high school
Mm.
at the same time as being captain of the baseball team.
Wow.
So it was a great opportunity to do the things that you love to do in that small kind of pond. And so it was a habit that I began with John, and I just ran with it, and I haven't stopped. And that's the
Mm.
weird thing about it. Once you start writing songs, you're
Mhm.
kind of looking for them, and you're kind of always got your radar out. If you hear a phrase or if you see a certain, there's things that you twist it in your head, and it's like, oh yeah, that's an idea. Let's do that,
Mhm.
and you believe in it, and so that's part of it. I think is that we had someone who believed in the goodness of the songs that we were writing one another,
Mhm.
and so and now after having the success that I've had, even though I'm not on the charts anymore, I'm
Mm.
still writing songs. I moved to Nashville
Right.
partially because they give songwriters a lot of respect here,
Mhm.
as opposed to having to have a band and having people coordinate being in other bands or trying to keep them under.
Hmm.
retainer, which is very difficult to do if you're not doing big tours. So there, that was part of it, and yeah, I've written over 2,000 songs.
Wow.
I've kind of stopped counting at a certain point, and Nashville is very much a collaborative songwriting town,
Hmm.
and it took me a little while to kind of get into the swing of that, and you know, I think I've done some good songs in collaboration. In
Hmm.
fact, one of the albums I put out right after the Lost album was called Walternative. Yeah,
I have that written down here. Yeah.
I like to play it, and that was the songwriting collaboration album for me.
Yeah.
So, and even now when I'm doing these opening act things where it's just me and my guitar,
Hmm.
I'm looking back and I'm going, "Oh, well, I left that song. I should really do that." It, it's like it's great that I have the song that catches everybody's attention,
Hmm.
but I feel like, well, what about this one? What about this one?
Hmm.
And and so it's a lifetime habit of writing songs. And then after Alternative, there was a label in North Carolina called Gaff Records who put out basically the outtakes from Alternative, and that
Hmm.
was called Apocalypso Now.
Okay.
And um, then Pat Horgan, who will be part of the Chiller experience that we're going to do in a few weeks, um, which I guess Charles put us together in the
Hmm.
first place. And Charles and then Pat had a connection that turned into an album of mine called Raw Elegant.
Hmm.
And Raw Elegant, of course, is an anagram of Walter Egan. So,
Oh, wow. I
and
didn't even think about that.
I got that from
Yeah,
I
that's
got that
cool.
from my son. I didn't think of it either. I have to
Yeah.
give him credit for that. And but that never became a physical copy,
Hmm.
and got them to take that down.
Okay.
And I'm still trying to get the songs out of that album. But
Okay.
yeah, I've basically recorded in home studios through
Okay.
the aughts and the teens, the 20
Yeah.
teens,
Yeah.
with my drummer Ronnie Krasinski, who
Okay.
is a really great drummer. And then I
Yeah.
did the rest of the stuff myself.
The more recent ones I have listed here, Myth America instead of Miss
Yeah,
America, and Fascination, and your most recent one till now is Pluck.
right.
Yeah.
That's
So,
actually the
uh,
current one, I guess you'd have to
yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And yeah, and those are Red Steel, and so that's
Okay.
the guy who remastered the Lost album, the Mad Dog album,
Hmm.
way back in 2000.
Hmm.
He kind of flaked out for years, and then I started touring in Europe with Burrito Deluxe, and so whenever I would be in Britain, I would get in touch with him, and we stayed friends. It was like whatever, he was. There was another album that he was about to put out called The Meaning of Live,
Hmm.
which is of course a live album that I did, and that has sort of resurfaced in this latter period of his renewed interest. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
But yeah, so okay, in 2019, the Malibus did a show of it's called the International Pop Overthrow. It's this movable feast, so to speak, of kind of power pop music. They
Yeah.
have it in various towns, and this one was in Liverpool,
Hmm.
and so we went over to Liverpool and did the gig, and it was really cool. Even though it's not the original cavern,
Right.
it's
Well, I,
still.
I went last year with Charles. He does the annual tour to Liverpool and
Oh, right,
London.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I actually went finally the first time. And yeah, I was in the cavern and everything. It was great. So, yeah.
yeah. No, they've latched on to Beatles being tourists, being money.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
I
Uh-huh.
think that took a little while for them to acknowledge that.
Hmm.
But yeah, and that it's a very cool thing.
Hmm.
And so we did that, and Robert came up from London, and
Hmm.
I carried a bunch of my home recording CDs that I had made,
Hmm.
described to you, and basically every year I would do another album, because I'd write certainly about 10 or 15 songs a year, and I
Hmm.
would be carrying songs along that I believed in,
Hmm.
and so yeah, and so I gave them to him, And that was 2019. And then 2020, of course, the world shut down.
Right.
And pretty much as that happened, I had a dream about Robert, and I just sent him a message, kind of offhanded, and he said, "Oh, I'm glad you got in touch with me. I've been listening to these CDs, and what is the Pamela album?" And so the Pamela album is Fascination, and that is the okay. My daughter is now 30 years old, but she, out of high school, moved to LA
Mhm.
around 2014, 2013, 14. And before she moved out there, I was driving around and she said, don't take this wrong, Dad, but I really like this book. And the book was I'm with the Band, which was Pamela DeBar's
Oh
big
yeah.
groupie manifesto, right?
Right.
And, and I said, well, you know, I think I might be Facebook friends with her. I met her at a Brooklyn Cowboys thing. And that Brooklyn Cowboys we haven't talked about. That
Mhm.
was the other country rock band that I was in.
Mhm.
So I got in touch and she said, yeah, come on out. I'm having a, yard sale or something. And so I went out there with Daphne, my daughter. And, I had been divorced since 2004 and hadn't really latched on to anyone. But, but my wife was 11 years younger than I. And so I skewed to younger. I mean, I tend to think of women 11 years younger than me being my age, I guess you'd have to say.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
meeting Pamela, she was my age almost
Mhm.
exactly. She's like a month younger than I am.
Mhm.
And of course I was aware of her being in GTOs and sort of being out
Right.
there in the scene in LA, but I had never really thought much about her. Anyway, and there with Daphne looking through her stuff, it was like, oh, that's interesting. She remembers like the things I do, and it's like there's a good reason that someone being your own age might be good to be with.
Mhm.
Anyway, at least that's what I thought at the time. And I started having a crush on her, and I'd write these songs every time I go to
Wow.
LA to visit Daphne or to do a Malibu's gig, or sometimes to do my own gigs. And I'd take her out to dinner, and I'd play the song for her, and it's like, yeah, okay, and so basically there's this song cycle of about 10 songs that describe the arc of getting a crush on someone, trying to get them to like you, and thinking they like you, and thinking, oh, they don't really like me,
Oh.
and then ending it with a song called "Hell, I Know It's Over," which
Wow.
was the best song on it. So, but yeah, and
Interesting
so Robert,
concept album, though. I'll
well,
say
that's what
that. Yeah.
Robert thought. He
Yeah.
said, a
Yeah.
lot of people probably can relate to this.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's okay.
I think we've all done this, no
Yeah,
matter who you
exactly.
are.
And
You
of
have some
course,
big crush on somebody and it just doesn't work out.
well, I think,
Yeah.
I've made a career out of that in
Yeah.
some ways. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
and the awkward part about this coming out then is that my former ex-wife and I had gotten back together
Mm.
in 2017. And so here's this like, oh, you're going to put out this new album. Hey, great. And, oh, it's what? It's about who? You know, uh, I'm sorry, but what can I tell you? This
Yeah.
is,
Eh,
the lag time in the music business.
right.
It's one of those things,
You
even,
can't put that out. No.
yeah, even with Magnet and Steel, at the
Yeah.
time it
Yeah.
coming out, I was with another woman who
Hmm.
could not get over the fact that, well, you're
No.
still in love with Stevie Nicks. We don't
Yeah.
want to do. I'm here. I'm living with you. What
Yeah.
do you want?
Did
So,
they always rumor it or whatever. Did you actually have a real relationship with Stevie Nicks, or was that a crush type thing as well? So,
well, it was more than a crush because I
okay.
didn't know her,
Yeah.
but it was only you know in uh, in Congress, you might say, for about a month of that of
Yeah.
that first
Okay.
album, like
Yeah.
in the end of
Uh,
'76.
yeah.
We
Hmm. Hmm.
I got all we had great thing going, and then I went back to New York for the Christmas holidays, and then I got back, and it
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe, maybe this isn't happening now.
Oh
Well, it was
well.
it was awkward because
Yeah.
of they were still having their
Yeah, they were still
dynamic
kind of going
battle
through
going,
things. Yeah, yeah.
and we were making that album together, and so it became really awkward. It wouldn't like,
Right.
hey, Stevie, come on,
Yeah, yeah.
let me
Yeah,
snuggle
because
with you while Lindsay stands there next to us. It wasn't going to work, you know. So it was
right.
just like,
Hmm.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So she was, but she was my muse there for a while,
that's cool.
and it was nice, and we remained friends through the
Yeah, I was gonna
years.
ask, are you still friends with like Lindsay too and everybody else?
Oh
Or
yeah,
okay, okay, that's cool.
yeah. He even imitated me with my open heart surgery a few years ago.
Mm.
So much in common. Yeah,
Hmm.
but yeah, and so that's just the way it goes. You write as a songwriter, you write songs to try and impress the ladies,
Yeah,
and then sometimes it works at the moment, maybe, but lots of times, if you're lucky, you get a good song out of it, and
fair enough.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of what the Pamela album, the
yeah.
Fascination was,
Mm. Mm.
and so yeah, and then Pluck, which came out about a year or two ago, actually. Now there's been three singles from it. The last single came out last summer. It's a
Hmm.
song called "Hard Summer Days." You might look for that video. I like it. I think the song is really strong, and I do it when I do my solo sets these days too. But
Okay.
yeah, I did a cover of Stevie's song "Dreams," and
Yeah, I did see that video. Yeah,
yeah,
that was a cool video.
it's, you know,
Yeah.
those were pretty much mostly made by the guy
Hmm.
Robert over in England.
Hmm.
So, but I
Yeah,
hope he does do the vinyl thing. I hope that comes out. You
yeah.
know,
I hope so too.
but meanwhile, I'm still playing, as I was saying, doing these gigs with Ambrosia and Firefall and
Mhm.
Orleans,
Okay.
and I've been doing a weekly radio show.
Hmm.
There's a station here called Hippie Radio,
Hmm.
um, and so one morning when I'm not doing music, I am a substitute teacher at a high school here.
Oh wow.
Keeps me in touch with the younger people,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting. I've been there. It's a great job for a musician because you can work when you want to,
Right.
and then if you got a gig, you can go away and come back
Hmm.
and still have somewhere that'll pay you on a regular basis. Whereas
Right. Hmm.
the music business doesn't always do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I well, they one morning before I went to school, they played Magnet and Steel, and so I sent the guy a little note saying thanks for the spin, appreciate it, listen to your station, blah blah blah. But it's called hippie radio, but they don't really play hippie music. Oh, they do a little, of course, but it's basically another name for an oldies station. And they play 60s to maybe
Right.
90s music. And so he said, "Well, come in and do an interview." And we did an interview, and I said, "Well, I was in college on the radio during the hippie era. I would be. Why don't you let me do a couple of shows where I put in real hippie music all together, and rather than all spaced out during your day, your radio day." He said, "Okay, well, yeah, but if you want to do that, you got to do it for a year. You have to do 52 shows."
Wow.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I guess I could do that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, coming this week is show 47.
Hmm.
So it's been on since May of last year,
Hmm.
and it's on Sunday nights, and it streams. So it's basically streamable. It's from 10 to 11 Central Time.
Hmm.
So my East Coast friends, my demographic, are usually in bed by that time, but
Hmm.
my West Coast friends are able to tune in. And there is an archive now. They've put it together as a podcast.
Hmm.
So if you go to hippieradio945.com
Okay.
and click on my picture, you can find all these shows. And
Nice.
basically, I do highlight 66 to 71, 72. And
Hmm.
every now and then I'll slip some of my music in there. And, what the heck? It's
Yeah.
like he wants it to be personality radio. So I talk about
Right.
seeing all these
Yeah.
acts. That was the amazing part about
Yeah.
that era and the
Yeah.
giants that walked among us. I mean, I was a huge Doors fan, huge Jimi
Hmm.
Hendrix fan,
Yeah.
and I got to see these guys 7 or 8 times. I saw the Beatles 3 times.
Oh wow.
That's how I think that's how Charles let me be part of his Beatles book.
Now you're the second person I've met that has seen Beatles three times. I know
Um,
there's somebody at my work. She says, "Yeah, I saw him three times, 64, 65, 66, once every in the San Francisco Bay Area was where she
okay, so she
saw
saw the
them all."
last show then,
Yeah,
because that was the last
yep,
show in San
yep.
Francisco.
And then she saw the Cow Palace the other year. So yeah, so yeah.
Well, I saw the first one at Carnegie Hall
Oh wow.
in February of '64, and then I saw them in Forest Hills that summer,
Hmm.
and then I saw them the following year at Shea Stadium,
Oh wow. Okay.
'65 at Shea Stadium,
Hmm.
and I think it was at Charles's convention. I met Sid Bernstein,
Oh yeah.
who was the promoter of
Right,
that,
right.
famously, you know? And at the time, we were outraged that they would charge $5.50 for a ticket. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, you could-
what to sit up at the top of
uh, uh,
shit?
yeah.
So,
Five
so when
bucks
I
is
met
cheap.
him, I said,
Yeah.
thanks for doing that. And I said, I just got to say, we thought you overcharged for those tickets at the
Ah.
time. Yeah. And he was like,
Yeah.
he started pulling his
Yeah.
wallet out. He was going to give me $5 back. It was great.
Yeah.
He was such a character.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I always ask if anybody who's seen the Beatles, could you actually hear them or was it just noise?
Yeah. At Carnegie Hall, I sat in the balcony, and no, you could hear the bass
Okay.
and just the screaming of the jet engine that was the
Right, right.
people coming. And then when the song would be over, there would sort of be a minute, a little subsiding of the screams. And then they'd say a word or two, and then they would be screaming again. And so, really, like, you'd have to judge by the bass part
Huh.
what the song it was. And then at Shea Stadium, I mean, I was
Yeah,
10 rows from the top of the stadium.
right.
And they had those Bose speakers lined up
Yeah.
along the foul lines. And so, uh,
I'm sure you've seen the film, right? Yeah.
oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I
so you
thought,
go, "Oh,
well,
that's what I was supposed to hear," you
why over there? I think
know.
Hillary Clinton was at that show too,
Hmm.
famously.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, it was great. I mean, being grown up in New York, you got to see a lot of acts because they'd all come through there. And
Right.
the first time I saw the Doors was at a place called Steve Paul's The Scene,
Hmm.
and that was a little club off. I think it was on 46th Street off Times Square,
Hmm.
and this was before Light My Fire, so they weren't really mainstream yet. They were, there may have been probably about 40 or 50 people that were really tuned into them there. And all of us were sitting on the dance floor in front of the stage.
Hmm.
And the rest of the club was basically empty, except for some businessmen in the back
Hmm.
who seemed to be trying to score with their secretary or something, and making noise. And Jim was trying to do this poetry, and
Right.
he was just amazingly charismatic in the beginning. He was just had that innocence of it. I mean,
Yeah.
before all the feedback made him
Yeah.
Lion, Lizard King, and all that.
Yeah. Were they still wearing the matching suits and everything, or they passed that already?
No, no, this is the Doors, and they didn't.
Okay. Okay.
They
Okay.
were they were very much
Okay.
hippies. And, but yeah, and he was trying to do one of his poems, and the noise disturbed him, and he stopped, and he went, "You want a effing bar band? We'll give you an effing bar band." And they broke into Louie Louie
Oh.
and walked off stage, and that was
Hmm.
like 15 minutes into the set, and everybody was like, "What? What just happened?" You know, but we waited, and they finally came back out and did the
Hmm.
rest of their set. But yeah, it was an amazing time to be
Hmm.
in the midst of all that music.
Yeah. I mentioned Greg Kinn earlier. Of course, he's passed away, but I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm in Oregon now, even though I alluded
Well,
like I was on the East Coast. I'm actually on
yeah,
the West Coast. But anyway, um, uh, he was on a DJ for 16 years on a San Jose radio station. So, and he would do exactly what you're saying is he'd sneak in Jeopardy or he'd sneak in,
oh yeah,
uh, they don't play him anymore or whatever, those other big hit, it's like, so I can totally identify with that, with what you're doing. I
oh
probably
yeah,
have to take
yeah,
a
of
listen.
course,
So, you know.
yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I try to play music that they don't play
Yeah.
on the regular
Yeah.
in the
And you
day.
try to do that too, of course, within
Yeah.
limits, of course. Yeah. You can probably have a little more
So I
freedom.
will play
Yeah.
like Malibu's and Brooklyn Cowboys and
Hmm.
these kind of things. In
That's
fact,
cool.
my very first cut, as they say, was a
Hmm.
song called "Come to Me,"
Hmm.
which was recorded in 1970 by a woman named Esther Mae Scott,
Hmm.
Mama Scott. And Mama Scott began her career in like 1915. She was like a blues singer with Bessie Smith,
Mm.
and she did that for like 10 years, and then she gave up the business and she went off into whatever other things she did, like being a housekeeper and things. And then
Hmm.
she was having a revival, starting to play again in DC in the late 60s there.
Hmm.
And so we got connected. In fact, we played a uh, a rally for Eugene McCarthy
Mm.
in 1968, and got to we got to play her song of her my song as she did it in
Hmm.
on this show. I try to have themes go along, and in fact, I'm stepping out of the Walt vault. Usually is what I said, the hippie stuff, a lot of
Hmm.
San Francisco and L.A. But this one's going to be my surf music show, which
Hmm.
goes back beyond all of that.
Right.
So I'm trying to broaden it out a little bit,
Hmm.
not so much toward my career in the '70s, but more the
Right.
other direction. Which I to me that's the music that inspired me anyway. It's
Right.
like
Hmm.
something that I love, and I don't think anybody plays it anymore. So I might as well, as long as they're letting me do it.
That's cool.
And yeah, and so I don't know how much longer I'm going to do it. It's a labor of love as much as anything.
Hmm.
I don't think it's been, you know, catching on too much, but I'm actually doing a Georgetown show
Hmm.
this week, and one of the players in the band is a mucky muck at Sirius. So I'm going to see if he might be interested.
Hmm. Okay. Well,
You know,
let's. I'll start.
syndication. That's the name of the game.
Right. I'll start wrapping it up, but I do have two more questions. One is, when you tour nowadays, how do you tour? That's a silly question, but I mean, you
Well,
tour solo, but I mean, which groups do you tour with? Because I thought you did tour with the Malibus still and things like that. Is that correct? Or
we
how do you
do.
tour nowadays?
Yeah. Well, the curious thing, I think it's in the back there somewhere on that sign that you're blocking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
the
we go.
Malibus with Jane Seymour,
Is that the
which is a
actress? Yeah.
curious. Yeah, well, that's the thing. My buddy from high school days, John
Hmm.
Zambetti, he has kept the band going ever since uh, that time when we did Malibu's Rule. We've
Hmm.
done like I think 5 albums now,
Hmm.
CDs or whatever, and John's longtime wife had serious health condition, and then she died in 2019.
Hmm.
And so John was cut adrift, as it were. And during that time, his son, who is a great musician in his own right, he has a band called The Palms. You
Hmm.
might check them out if you like current music.
Hmm.
Um, put him together with Jane Seymour, who was also living in Malibu and at loose ends, as they say, and they hit it off. And so yeah, so John is living the life of well, basically a lot of Jane's life these days. So we're not doing as many gigs as we used to do.
Okay.
Although he does seem to think that this could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for the Malibu.
Okay. Okay.
And it might be, who knows,
Yeah. Hmm.
but yeah, so I still do those,
Hmm.
but they've been fewer in the last couple of years since Jane has been around.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I have my own band here in Tennessee,
Hmm.
but I found that I enjoy doing this solo songwriter with an acoustic guitar thing as much as anything.
Hmm.
And when I do gigs with Ambrosia, they're my backup band. And
Hmm.
when I do gigs with Orleans, they're my backup band.
I see.
And so
Okay.
I'll do like three or four, maybe five songs with those guys when I do those gigs.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it's uh, it's a weird thing, you know. I've been probably from the time of getting that first deal where I went, so you want me to sing these songs? You know, I was like from that point to even recently to me kind of realizing, well, yeah, you're going to sing these songs and you're going to sing them. So I've been really investing my time in singing a lot lately
Hmm.
in hopefully anticipation of doing longer sets. I do like a half an hour with Ambrosia with Atlanta Rhythm Section and Firefall,
Hmm.
and you know maybe city winery gigs or whatever.
Hmm.
Anyway, I just like playing the songs that I. When I had a band, there were certain you know repertoire of songs that seemed to work best with the band,
Hmm.
and with doing it acoustically, I'm able to broaden that out and do songs that I wouldn't have done. So yeah, I mean, I'm touring that way. I don't know. You know, I am happy that I have my health. I'm happy that I'm. You know, I had the open heart surgery in 2014,
Mm.
and I had no idea that I was on the edge of you know being a legend at that point. Okay. Uh, Ian McLaughlin died like a couple of months after I had my operation
Mm.
of basically the same thing. I had 98% blockage in one of
Wow.
my things, and
Hmm.
I had no idea. I was jumping around and doing all the things I ever did.
Hmm.
So luckily, I had a bad hip, and luckily, I got Medicare
Hmm.
because I've never had really insurance, and so I went and looked into it, and they said, "Yeah, just take the physical." I took the physical. You know, 5 days later, I was at Vanderbilt being sliced open and getting a triple bypass.
Wow.
So
Well,
yeah, it's like life comes at you in funny ways sometimes.
I'm
I've
glad it was
been
a
real fortunate.
success.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, yeah. So I've been real happy about
mhm.
surviving all of that,
Yeah.
and I don't know. It's been a good ride, and I'm still riding. So
Mhm.
I'm thankful for yacht rock and all of that. Well, yeah, you know, it's nice to be included in there, even though you know these are songs that I don't think are exact. I mean, Magnet and Steel is three chords basically, you know, and a lot of these songs have chords, way many chords than
It is
that.
a good earworm, I'll say that. It's like I was singing it all day long, and it's like, wow, I only listened to it once yesterday.
Oh, well, that's,
But I knew it when it first came out, so they used to play
yeah.
it on the radio all the time. So yeah, yeah.
Well, one of the things that we're about to do is my manager Greg, who sadly passed away last September, had in those days we made the deal for Columbia for North America only,
Mm,
and then we made deals for territories around the world,
mm,
and each deal had new blood and new interest and that kind of. I thought it was a good idea,
hmm.
and those deals have reverted to us now,
Oh,
or
cool.
his estate and me, and we are narrowing it down. There's three labels that are in the running to reissue those and to re-promote them and do that. So yeah, I mean, I mean, Magnet and Steel was big in America certainly because when I tell people, "Oh, do you have a song?" and it's like, "Yeah, I had this song called Magnet and Steel." It's like, "Oh, I don't know," and then they hear it and they go, "Oh, that," you know.
Yeah.
It's been in like four movies, and it's one of those songs that it's hard to escape from, I guess, which is great. I'm very happy about that. But I
Mm,
don't think it's had that same success outside of North America. And
mm,
so hopefully this new deal will, I can still get out there and do gigs for
right.
them. I can promote them. And of course, now things are promoted in different ways. I guess I have to go viral on TikTok if I really want to have a hit.
Right.
But,
Okay.
you know,
This is my last question, then you can promote the show and everything. But and this is just out of left field, but just reading about things you've done and everything like that. It says that you were on a few game shows or a couple, Catchphrase and Scrabble. What was that about? How did that happen? And how did you do on those shows?
Yeah, I did really well on catchphrase. I came that close to winning the Trans Am, the
Oh,
Pontiac
okay.
Trans Am. But well, it's I was looking around for things to do during this. There's peaks and valleys in
Hmm.
careers,
Yeah.
and I had our son had been born in '85, and so and my wife had work. She was working, and so I was basically staying at home with my son
Hmm.
and looking for other things to do. I was writing book reviews for the Books 100, which was a book review magazine that came out of LA. I
Hmm.
was doing extra work. I was in a movie called 8 Million Ways to Die,
No.
and also a couple of TV movies. And I was in the, the Trials of Rosie O'Neill, a TV show that
Hmm.
was on for a little while. I would do like those kind of gig work, I guess you'd call it now.
Yeah.
And so I saw an ad that was like looking for contestants for this new game show called Catchphrase.
Mm.
So I went and tried out, and I turned out I was really pretty good at. They basically were rebus puzzles that would illustrate titles of movies or books, or kind of cliches or whatever.
Hmm.
And I was able to do that. But the funny thing was, and they do tape these shows pretty much all at once, so you have to bring like 5 changes of
Yeah,
clothing
I've heard that.
and the whole
Yeah.
deal. And so the first week, there was this woman who was the juggernaut who basically was mowing down everybody, and they always tried to match the men with the woman. And I got to be the last man up against her,
Mm.
and I did it. I won, and then went on to win like 5 days after that of these crazy puzzles and crazy overpriced prizes. Basically, they had like this gold watch, which wasn't really gold watch,
Right.
highly priced, and
It's,
and all of that stuff.
it's like the
And you
old
have to,
Wheel of Fortune or
yeah,
something.
you have to pay taxes on all of it too, which is
Yeah.
another interesting part of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, and so it was Dennis James was the host,
Oh, wow.
and so yeah, I got brought down by the Road to Hong Kong or something. It was some movie like that anyway. But I did really well on that one. And then the Scrabble one, I love Scrabble. I've always played Scrabble.
Yeah.
Of course,
Hmm.
words are a big part, as you can tell from the titles of my albums. Big part of my life. They keep me amused. So yeah, I tried out for that, and I got on there, and I think I won 3 days, 2 or 3 days. I was the champion for that. I think they still show it on Game Show Network.
Yeah.
Every now
Yeah.
and then you can
I'll have to
someone
look for your
says,
episode if it
it's
ever pops
funky,
up.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, but
Uh,
Chuck Woolery was a bit full of himself, and
I've heard
he
that.
was yeah, and talking about watches, he had some big watch
Yeah.
that he was like, "Hey, you like my watch?" It's like, then he feigned. So you had a hit. Where was that? And, Magnum Steel. Yeah. I don't know. And then his announcer was Charlie Tuna, who
Yeah.
was a DJ out in LA, and
Yeah.
so Charlie gave him the word that yeah, man, that's a good song. Yeah, good song. Anyway, so yeah, that was fun. And then you can only be on 3 game shows in a lifetime,
Hmm.
and so I wanted to be on. Well, I was thinking about Jeopardy, but that was hard to get to. But Dick Clark was retooling Name That Tune,
Mm.
which was, when I was a kid, was on that where
Yeah.
people would run across the stage and ring the bell, and it was crazy. It was a
Yeah.
crazy thing like that. So yeah, I tried out for that, and I did real well on it, but I did a little too well. I was where they had bid a note. They would say, they give you a clue about the song, and I could get the song from the clue. So I was like, oh, I can get it with no notes. I know what it is. That's it's not fun for the listener, for the
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah.
If you don't play the game, it's like, oh, I get you.
Uh,
So I didn't
uh,
really get to follow through on that, but yeah. it was part of my checkered career.
Yeah, I just was surprised when I'm leaving, record album, group, writing, game shows.
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
okay. So,
yeah,
I'm sure you're not asked about it very often, so I figured I'd ask you.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
and as a writer, I always wanted to be a writer anyway, and so
Yeah, yeah.
I had a gig writing for RCA's in-house publication where they would hype their coming up records and stuff. And this was in the late '80s, and so I'd write hype about the Thompson twins and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. And yeah, I really enjoyed the book review gig, which was I only got paid like a penny a word, I think, and I'd review maybe 5 or 6 books per issue,
Mm,
and the guy had an office on Hollywood Boulevard that was in one of these really old. It just felt old. It was like an old building, and you climb up the stairs, and it was this office where books were just scattered all over the floor. This guy, and he looked like someone out of Central Casting. Just, he would have the hat on his head sometimes, and he'd be like,
mm,
"Yeah, you want to write these?" It's like, so it was great. It was, you know, I love the history of Hollywood. The 20s and 30s, and the early days of the film industry. There's a series of books called The Garden of Allah
mm,
that kind of recreate that. It's like 3 characters and the Garden of Allah was a hotel at Sunset and Laurel Canyon,
mm,
and it follows them through the years of Hollywood until that hotel closed, 1959.
mm,
And so, yeah, when I first moved out there, I went to Grauman's Chinese, and I tried to see whose footprint was the same as mine. And actually, Cary Grant's was the one that my foot fit into.
Cool.
So, yeah, it was neat. It was the first maybe even year of being in California. I was I would wake up and go, "My God, I can't believe I'm here." Oh, it just was, and it was great. It was just at the end of kind of the '60s feel. This was 1974.
Mm,
It was before that. In fact, okay, after I did that tour with Chris Darrow and came back to LA, I stopped in New York, and then I flew into LA, and Chris was going to pick me up. And of course, coming from Claremont, it took a while for him to get there. And so I waited at LAX, and I could just like sit there outside whatever airline it was. It was so sleepy compared to the crazy place that it is now.
right.
And, listen to the announcement: the white zone is
Oh
for
yeah, I remember that.
immediate loading and unloading.
Immortalized in Airplane, but yes.
No parking. Yeah, yeah. That was my afternoon. I sat there for
Yeah,
2 hours
yeah,
waiting.
yeah.
I was lucky enough to be there in those days,
Hmm,
and it's just such a crazy place now, and
hmm.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
even here in Nashville, after 27 years, it's changed a lot.
yeah,
And I guess it's inevitable.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been a good ride, and I'm happy that where I got to do another thing with Charles. This Chiller, is
Hmm.
it Chiller Theater or just Chiller? What is it
Uh, I
called?
think it's a lot of people just say it the chiller nowadays, but it is the chiller theater based on
Oh,
the old TV
right,
show, but it's kind
right.
of morphed into general celebrity autograph show,
Yeah,
and
well, that's fine. That's
you know,
good.
um,
Charles tapped me for he did a Beatle tribute show at Town
mm,
Hall in 2014, I guess it
mhm,
was,
mhm,
and that would have been the 60th, 50th, anyway. And then I'm in his book of Beatle lists,
oh yeah, it's a
so
great
I'm
book.
happy about that. And
Yeah.
yeah, Charles is such a great guy and great promoter. And we did the Rock Con
Oh
in
yeah, he
2010.
talks about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to getting up there and getting back with Pat Horgan, who is going to be the musical director of the show. I'm going to get to play a little bit
Oh good.
on, I think, Saturday night,
Hmm.
um, and hopefully meet some of my fans. it's crazy that when I did the opening act for Atlanta Rhythm Section and Firefall up in North Tonawanda, outside of Buffalo, um, how many fans came out? It was like because I've been toting a bunch of CDs and pictures and stuff
Hmm.
for a long time, and I sold out there. I was like,
Oh, wow.
oh, this maybe I should move to Buffalo. You know, it's like
Shuffle off to Buffalo.
that's a lot. Um, so yeah, and so I'm trying to gather things to bring to the chiller fete, as they say.
Yes. All right. I guess give it one last plug, one last promotion. You can also promote your upcoming album, and if people want to contact you outside of Chiller, how they can do that.
Okay, well, there's Chiller, of course, that's coming up on the 25th, and I'll be playing in what is it in Rancho Palm Desert
Mm.
with Ambrosia on May 31st,
Mhm.
and I will. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I'm going
In
to
a
be
couple
in.
of weeks,
I'll
mid
be in
April, mid
DC
April. Yeah.
doing a thing. Yeah, I'm doing a thing in DC a week after this. Yeah, then my radio show, hippieradio945.com, Waltz Record Vault. You can find me there. And there's a Facebook page that goes with that, Waltz Record Vault. My Facebook page is an official one that's from the label in England, Walter Egan. And then there's my personal page, which I guess I should give out. I don't know. It's where I get most of my information. It includes my middle name, Lindsay, and that's my Instagram account. We haven't even talked about my art career. I've done. I was an art major in college, and I've continued doing pieces. I've I wrote a song called R&RIP a few years ago of
Oh.
sort of a send off to the greats that inspired me in kind of a pithy way. And then I made art pieces around it. I did paintings of, everybody from Elvis to Otis to Bo to Janis to, Dennis Wilson and all these people that I've known through the years. Anyway, so there's that on Instagram. If Walter Lindsay Egan Instagram, you can see a lot of my paintings, and some of those are available if people are interested. Um, and the book, which hopefully will be out this year, which is going to be called Magnitude: My Secrets to Reveal. At least at this point, that's what it's going to be called. Yeah, and what else? I don't know.
All right.
That sounds like enough.
That sounds great. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I want to thank you, Walter, for being my special guest today.
thanks.
If you're in the eastern United States, it's probably a short jaunt to go up and see this man, Chiller, from April 25th to 27th.
And
If
this,
you want to fly in from the West Coast, go for it too. It's
why?
like,
Why not? It'll be
you know,
even better.
you know,
And Parsippany, right? Is that
yeah.
that's the town that we're
I
in?
believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a
And
yes.
all right.
Well, great.
And it's like support this man, buy his records, buy his CDs,
Yeah,
and go see him on
read the
concert. And
book.
all right. And I want to thank Charles F. Rosenay for bringing Walter to my attention again. And I hope you have a good show. And
Thank you. I've appreciated being with you, Mark.
I hope
And
if you come out to the West Coast ever, like Oregon or Washington, that's usually where I'm out nowadays. You know,
well, maybe we
hopefully I
connect.
can come and see you
Yeah,
on
well,
tour.
I'll keep in touch if I'm.
All
Hey,
right.
my life goes where it goes.
Yes.
So, and I hope I do get up there. I love that area.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Portlandia.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm in actually a couple hours south. I'm in Eugene, Springfield area, Springfield to be
Okay,
exact.
Eugene.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I did gigs there back in the day.
Yeah.
I think
So,
I
yeah.
autographed a zucchini in Eugene.
Well, if you come to Springfield now, they got Simpsons characters all over the place.
Yeah,
So that's what we have here. And then Eugene, of course, is Animal House. So that's what
yeah.
our big claim to fame here.
It's a good
Anyway.
state, and I wouldn't mind being there.
All right.
But here I am in Tennessee. What can I tell
Yeah.
you?
And maybe I'll make it out to Tennessee again, you know. It's like it's been a long time. So, or the East Coast. I was in New York only in the airport last August. I'd like
What,
to go back, but I will start traveling again. So anyway. All
yeah,
right.
you'll come to the chiller, you know.
Yeah, I got to come out one of these years. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, thanks
All
so much.
right.
It has been fun to be with the Fun Ideas people here. You are
Yes.
the fun idea, I
I am
guess.
Fun Ideas Podcast. I do
That's,
write books and things like that. You can look up, you can ask
oh,
Charles
great.
what I co-wrote a book with Charles about the turtles, so you'll probably see that at the show and things like
Oh,
that. So, you know,
all right.
anyway.
Nice.
All right. Well, thanks again, and we'll wrap it up. This is another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast, and I'm your host, Mark Arnold, with our special guest, Walter Egan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Have a great night.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.